magnificent Mustang stood frozen in fear, chained to the jagged edge of Thunder Mountain's crumbling cliffs. Once a symbol of untamed freedom, his spirit was shattered, abandoned, alone, and moments from death. Above him, dark storm clouds gathered like a final judgment. He had lost all hope until Michael Cooper stumbled upon him during what was supposed to be a simple morning hike. What unfolded next would leave an entire town breathless. This wasn't just a rescue. It became a soul-stirring battle for survival and redemption. A decorated veteran, a terrified wild horse, and a race against a violent storm, a ruthless land developer, and the mountain itself. Horizon Ridge had seen hardship before, but nothing like this. No one was ready for the kind of sacrifice Michael was about to make. This emotional tale of betrayal, second chances, and unlikely heroes will show you how a horse named Tempest, left to die in silence, and a man haunted by war found each other in the unlikeliest place and changed every life around them forever. Before we go deeper, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story hits you the way it hit us, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've got something even more powerful coming your way. The wind howled across Thunder Mountain, bending the tall pines and carrying the low grumble of a coming storm. Michael Cooper paused on the narrow trail, his breath fogging in the cold air. He turned his weathered face toward the sound that caught his ear, not wind, not thunder, but something different, a cry, raw, wounded, desperate. His hand moved instinctively to his hip, muscle memory from the military days, even though the weapon hadn't been there in years. 3 years home, and the reflexes hadn't faded. His sharp eyes scanned the rugged terrain. "Hello?" he called out, his voice lost in the vast, empty mountain air. No answer. Then the cry came again, louder, more urgent, not human, but familiar, painfully familiar. Michael left the trail without thinking, scrambling across loose rock and shale, following the sound around a narrow bend. That's when he saw it, and his heart stopped. There, 50 feet below, on a narrow outcropping barely wider than a table, stood a Mustang. Not just any horse, a wild one. Its chestnut coat was filthy and streaked with what looked like dried blood. The powerful animal trembled with exhaustion and sheer terror. But what made Michael's blood run cold was the chain. A thick, rusted chain wrapped around its neck and legs, bolted directly into the rock face. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone had chained a wild Mustang to the side of a mountain and left it there to die. "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered, dropping to his knees to get a better look. One misstep, one gust of wind, and the animal would fall hundreds of feet to its death. It was only the cruel chain, now cutting into its flesh, that kept it standing. Then, the Mustang's eyes met his, and in that moment, something passed between them. A connection, recognition, a silent scream. Michael had seen that look before in the eyes of his brothers in arms, in the mirror during his darkest nights, the look of something proud, wild, and utterly broken. "Hold on," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "I'm getting you out of there." The horse jerked, yanking against the chain, dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Michael's mind shifted into military precision. The path down was steep, unstable, and the wind was gaining strength. The storm was coming in fast. He had maybe an hour, no time to run for help. If he left now, the horse would be dead by the time he returned. He dropped his pack and checked supplies. Rope, water, first aid kit, pocket knife, small hatchet. Not enough to break that chain, but maybe enough to survive long enough to try. No cell signal, just as he expected. Still, he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo of his daughter, Ellie. Her smile gave him strength. He had promised her this would be a safe hike. No risks. Not after losing her mother. "Sorry, kiddo," he whispered. "This one's necessary." The first raindrops began to fall as he secured his rope and began the descent. The Mustang watched him closely, muscles tensed, ready to lash out if this stranger made the wrong move. "Easy, boy," Michael called through the rising wind. "I'm here to help." The climb was worse than it looked. Twice his feet slipped, sending stones tumbling into the abyss below. Each time rocks tumbled into the void below, the Mustang flinched, pulling against the chains that held him prisoner. When Michael finally reached the narrow ledge, he moved with the slow, practiced calm he'd once learned in the cavalry unit. Long before infantry, long before the war. His voice was low, steady, measured. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, inching closer. "Whatever bastards did this to you, I'm not one of them." The Mustang's nostrils flared, catching Michael's scent, sizing him up. Up close, the horse looked even worse. This wasn't just a wild Mustang that had wandered into trouble. This was a victim. His coat was caked with mud and dried blood, crisscrossed with welts and open wounds. Someone had been abusing this animal. Not for days, for weeks, maybe months. The chain was brutal, industrial grade, clamped around his chest, legs, and neck. The end was bolted deep into the rock, reinforced by iron spikes. There was no way Michael could snap it with what he had. His only option was to free the horse piece by piece from the restraints around its flesh. "I'm gonna have to touch you," Michael warned, moving another step forward. The Mustang panicked. With explosive strength, it lashed out, nearly knocking Michael off the cliff. Only sheer instinct saved him, his fingers catching a jutting rock as his boots skidded over the edge. "Whoa!" he gasped, heart pounding like a war drum. "I get it. You don't trust humans. Can't say I blame you." The rain was falling harder now, slicking the rock beneath his feet and making every movement treacherous. The wind shrieked through the cliffs, rising like some living, furious thing. The storm wasn't on its way anymore. It was here. Michael steadied himself, approached again from a slightly different angle, speaking softer this time. "My name's Michael," he said, barely above the wind. "Used to ride with the Army's last mounted unit before they switched me over to infantry. Spent more time with horses than with people for a while. Best years of my life." The Mustang's ears twitched. It didn't back away. "My daughter Ellie loves horses too," Michael added. "She's got a little one named Daisy. Not like you, though. You're something else. You're wild. You're special." Another cautious step. The Mustang trembled but didn't strike. "Whoever did this to you, they're gonna pay, I promise." Now close enough to see it clearly, Michael realized the collar wasn't simple. The chains were wound intricately around the Mustang's chest and legs, bound with multiple locks and hammered into the stone. No way to pick them, cutting through them, impossible without serious tools. But the spikes anchoring them, they might be the weak point. Michael took out his small hatchet, wedged it under the base of one of the spikes, and tried to use it as a lever. Nothing. He braced harder, putting all his weight behind it. Still no movement. A deafening thunderclap exploded overhead, making both man and horse jump. Rain poured in sheets now. Michael's fingers were starting to go numb, the cold seeping into his bones. "Come on!" he growled, gritting his teeth and throwing his full weight against the handle. The Mustang whinnied, startled, as lightning tore the sky in half, illuminating the vast drop just inches away from them. Michael repositioned the hatchet, found a better grip, and shoved again with all his strength. This time, it moved, just slightly, but it moved. Encouraged, Michael rocked the hatchet back and forth, prying with every ounce of muscle he had left. The spike began to loosen. The rock around it cracked and started to crumble. But then, the worst happened. Another crash of thunder, another flash of light, and beneath them, the ledge shifted. A chunk of it, soaked and weakened by the relentless rain, gave way. The Mustang screamed. Its back legs slipped off the edge, dangling helplessly over the abyss. The only thing stopping the fall was the chain cutting into its body. It was going down. "No!" Michael lunged, grabbing the chain with one hand, the horse's mane with the other, planting his boots and locking every muscle in his body to fight gravity. For a second they hung there, man and beast on the brink of death, connected only by willpower and raw instinct. Then, with a mighty heave, the Mustang pulled itself back onto the ledge, legs trembling, soaked in rain, gasping in terror. And then it looked at him. This time, something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. This human wasn't like the others. Michael didn't waste the moment. He turned back to the spike, now more exposed after the slide, and drove into it with everything he had left. The rock gave way. The first part of the chain was free. 2 more to go. He moved to the second, worked faster now. His hands were bleeding, raw from rock and steel, but he didn't stop. The wind screamed louder, and the mountain shook with every crash of thunder. The second spike came loose more easily, 1 left. The ledge groaned beneath them again, like the mountain itself was warning them time was up. Michael, soaked to the bone and barely able to feel his fingers, met the Mustang's eyes. "Almost there," he whispered. The horse didn't move. It just watched him, calm, still and silent, like it understood exactly what was happening. "1 more," Michael whispered, "and you're free." He had just wedged the hatchet under the final spike when a voice cut through the storm, sharp, commanding, and carried on the wind. "Cooper! Step away from that horse." Michael looked up, blinking against the rain. At the top of the cliff where he'd begun his descent stood a figure, solid, unmoving. Even through the downpour, he recognized the silhouette. Thomas Blackwood, the wealthy developer buying up every piece of Horizon Ridge for his luxury resort empire. "That animal is my property," Blackwood bellowed. "You're trespassing and attempting to steal what's mine." Michael's shock quickly ignited into fury. "Your property? You did this?" he shouted. "You chained a wild Mustang to a cliff to die? That beast killed my son." Blackwood's voice cracked through thunder. "It deserves worse." The ledge trembled beneath them, more violently now. Michael knew the truth. It wouldn't hold for more than a few more seconds. "Leave now, Cooper!" Blackwood shouted, his tone shifting to threat. "Or I'll have Sheriff Miller arrest you for theft and trespassing." Michael turned back to the Mustang, eyes locked. The storm roared around them. "Sorry, pal," he said under his breath. "I don't take orders from monsters." With one final push, Michael pried the last spike loose. The chain fell away. Victory came a second too soon. The ledge gave out beneath them. Michael felt it. First the drop in his gut, then the rush of wind, the world spinning as the mountain vanished in a blur of rain and rock. He and the Mustang fell as one, his scream merging with the horse's wild cry, and in that moment between sky and stone, only one face flashed in his mind. Ellie, his daughter, the girl he'd promised to come home to, the girl who'd already lost too much. He had failed her, just as he'd failed his brothers in that distant village long ago. But then, something slammed into him. Not rock, muscle. The Mustang had found a ledge, a narrow outcropping just 20 feet down, and somehow positioned itself underneath Michael. He landed hard on the horse's back, the force knocking the air from his lungs. But he was alive. Somehow, they were both alive. "How?" he gasped, clutching the soaked mane for balance. Above them, Blackwood's face appeared at the cliff's edge, twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Cooper," he yelled before disappearing back into the storm. Michael took stock. The new ledge was small but solid, real mountain, not eroded dirt. It wouldn't collapse like the last one, but they were still far from safe. The main trail was a long way up, and the horse still wore the heavy collar and leg restraints. Michael looked at the Mustang. "Good instincts," he said, gently patting its neck. The horse flinched, but didn't pull away. "How about we make a deal?" Michael offered. "You get us out of here, and I promise, no one ever chains you up again." As if understanding, the Mustang turned its head toward a barely visible trail, a narrow path that hugged the mountain face. A trail only a creature born to this wilderness would notice. "You lead," Michael said softly. "I'll follow." He slid off the horse's back, boots crunching against the slick stone, and stood beside it. With Blackwood's threat still echoing in the wind and the storm trailing behind them, man and horse began the descent. Together, a veteran searching for purpose, a wild soul that had almost lost its freedom, and somehow, each had become the other's reason to fight. If this story is moving you like it moved us, hit subscribe. It helps us more than you know. And tomorrow we've got something even more powerful on the way. Now back to the mountain. The path clung to the sheer rock face like a ribbon, barely wide enough for hooves. Michael stayed close, one hand lightly touching the Mustang's flank for balance. The rain had slowed to a soft, steady drizzle, but the rocks were still slick, and every step sent small stones skittering into the foggy abyss below. "Steady," Michael murmured. The Mustang moved with grace, surprising given its condition. Despite the collar and chains, despite the abuse, it walked like it belonged here, like the mountain was part of it. Every few steps it paused and turned its head, checking on Michael, waiting. There was awareness in those eyes, intelligence. "Never thought I'd be following a horse's lead," Michael said with a tired grin, "but you know this place better than I do." After nearly an hour of careful descent, the path widened slightly, curving away from the drop. They were off the cliff, but not out of danger. Not yet. Blackwood's threat still hung in Michael's mind. The man didn't bluff. Suddenly the Mustang froze, ears sharp, body tight. Michael followed suit, heart skipping. Then he heard it, through the trees ahead, voices, and the mechanical growl of ATVs. "Blackwood's men," he whispered. "They're coming for you." The Mustang pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring. It was ready to bolt, but the metal restraints would make moving through the dense forest impossible without noise. Michael made a fast decision. This way. He guided the Mustang into a thicket of pine, dense enough for cover, thin enough to move through. "Enough to get us through," Michael whispered, eyeing the undergrowth. "But we need tools to get those restraints off you." The voices were getting closer now, mixed with the mechanical growl of ATVs rumbling through the forest. Michael guided the Mustang deeper between the trees, trying to balance speed with stealth, avoiding the soft, rain-soaked ground that could leave tracks. "Cooper!" a voice called, too close for comfort. "We know you're out here with the horse. Mister, Blackwood just wants what's his!" Michael froze. He knew that voice. Marcus Wilson, the mayor's son, one of Blackwood's hired lackeys, the kind of man who'd sell his conscience for a paycheck and never look back. "That horse injured Jason Blackwood," Marcus called again. "It needs to be put down. You're only making this harder for yourself." The Mustang tensed at the sound of human voices, its muscles bunched, nostrils flaring, ready to bolt. Michael laid a calming hand on its neck. "Don't listen to them," he murmured. "We'll figure this out." But the engines were gaining. They couldn't outrun ATVs, not with chains still clinking on every step. They needed a place to hide, somewhere to regroup, away from the noise and wheels. Then, Michael spotted it. A ravine, cutting through the forest ahead, its walls lined with moss and ferns. A rain-swollen creek rushing along the bottom. It wasn't ideal, but the water would mask their scent and maybe throw off the trail. "Come on," he urged, leading the Mustang toward it. The descent was steep. The horse balked at the edge, hooves skidding against the mud. "I know," Michael said gently, "but we don't have a choice." With quiet persistence, he coaxed the Mustang down the slope and into the icy creek. The cold bit instantly, soaking through Michael's boots and numbing his legs. The Mustang flinched at the cold but followed. They moved through the current, the sound of engines fading behind them as the ravine carried them deeper into a part of the forest even Michael didn't recognize, despite growing up in Horizon Ridge and knowing most of its secrets. After nearly a mile of wading through the winding creek, Michael saw what he'd hoped for, a small cave tucked into the ravine wall, almost invisible behind a curtain of moss and overhanging ferns. It wasn't deep, more of a sheltered overhang than a true cave, but it was dry and hidden. "In here," he said softly, guiding the Mustang forward. The stallion hesitated, flaring its nostrils at the unfamiliar scent of earth and stone. "It's all right," Michael reassured, "just for a little while." Inside, the cave floor sloped gently up and away from the water, giving them solid ground. Not much space, 15 feet maybe, but enough for both of them to rest. Michael sank onto a flat rock, the adrenaline that had fueled him draining all at once. Exhaustion crashed over him like the storm. He became acutely aware of every injury, raw hands, bruised ribs, and the deep gash on his forearm still oozing blood. The Mustang stood by the entrance, alert but calm, watchful. Not fleeing, not panicking, just present. Michael studied the animal in the dim light. Despite everything, there was still pride in the way it stood. Still dignity, still wildness. "Who are you?" Michael asked aloud. "And what did you do to make Blackwood hate you so much?" The stallion turned its head, looking at him with those knowing eyes. In better light, Michael could see details. A stallion, maybe 7 years old. Rich chestnut coat beneath the grime and blood, a white blaze down the center of his face. Compact, powerful, pure Mustang, wild and born to survive. "You need a name," Michael said quietly. "Can't just keep calling you Horse." He thought for a moment, then smiled. "How about Tempest? Feels right. You were born in a storm, and we met in one." The Mustang's ears flicked forward as if acknowledging it. "Tempest it is." Michael finally turned his attention to his arm. The cut needed attention, fast. He opened his small first aid kit, grateful it had survived the fall. Not much inside, but enough. Antiseptic, gauze, tape, a few painkillers. It would have to do. He gritted his teeth as he cleaned the wound, fighting the sting and pushing through the ache. His thoughts drifted to Ellie. By now, she'd be getting home from school. And when she saw he hadn't come back, she'd worry. She always worried. Ever since her mom died, 10 years old and already carrying the weight of the world. "I need to get back," he said aloud to Tempest, wrapping the gauze tight. "And I need to get those restraints off you." He looked at the chains again, still wrapped around the stallion's neck and legs, secured with industrial padlocks. Without bolt cutters or a saw, there was no chance of removing them here in the wilderness. They'd have to make it back to his ranch. Only then could he set Tempest truly free. "We'll get the tools," Michael said softly, glancing toward the restraints still digging into Tempest's skin. "But first, we need to understand why this is happening. Why would Thomas Blackwood, a man obsessed with image and control, go so far as to chain a wild Mustang to die on a cliff? Even for someone like him, that was beyond cruel." Michael had never interacted much with the developer. Blackwood had moved into Horizon Ridge 5 years earlier, buying up land for luxury resorts and promising economic revival. And in a struggling town desperate for jobs, that made him popular with business owners and city officials alike. But Michael had always sensed something beneath Blackwood's polished charm, something cold and calculated. Then he remembered Marcus's words. That horse injured Jason Blackwood. Jason, early 20s, rich, reckless, and known around town for treating people like disposable tools. A young man raised on entitlement and ego. Michael looked over at the Mustang, whose body still carried fresh wounds and old scars. "Did you hurt his son?" he asked gently. "Was it an accident?" Tempest stepped a little closer as Michael cleaned his wounds, then extended his neck slowly, sniffing Michael's outstretched hand. His eyes were deep, searching, like he was trying to decide whether or not this human was worth trusting. "I'm not accusing you," Michael added, his voice low. "I just want to understand." Tempest let out a low nicker, then, without warning, folded his legs beneath him and lay down, calmly, gracefully, close enough that Michael could have reached out and touched him. "Tired, huh?" Michael said with a soft smile. "Yeah, me too." The sound of the creek rushing outside, mixed with the soft patter of lingering rain, made the cave feel like a haven, almost peaceful, if not for the danger still closing in. They couldn't stay here. Blackwood's men would keep hunting, and Tempest needed real medical attention. The restraints were already inflaming the skin around his legs and neck. Michael's ranch, Whispering Pines, lay about 5 miles east, if his memory served. If they waited until nightfall, they might have a better shot at slipping past any patrols unnoticed. But that would also mean more hours of worry for Ellie. And after everything she'd been through, she didn't deserve that. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He hadn't expected any. But the screen still worked, and her smile on the lock screen gave him just enough strength to keep going. "We'll rest an hour," he told Tempest. "Then we move. My daughter's waiting for me, and you need those chains off." The stallion's eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion finally winning out. Michael leaned back against the rock wall, determined to stay awake and keep watch. But his body betrayed him. The adrenaline faded, the pain crept in, and within minutes, his eyes grew heavy and he slipped into uneasy sleep. Dreams came fast. Not the war this time, but chaos, falling, chains. Blackwood's face twisted in rage, and through it all, Ellie's voice echoing like a beacon. "Daddy, come home!" Michael jolted awake, disoriented. The light had changed. He looked at his watch. Almost 2 hours had passed. The rain had stopped and a soft golden glow filtered through the trees outside. Late afternoon. Tempest was already standing, alert, watching the cave entrance. Michael stood too, every muscle stiff with pain. His ribs ached, his hands throbbed, and the gash on his arm had soaked through the gauze. But they had no time left. "Time to go," he whispered. Outside, the forest was quiet, birds chirping, the creek rushing steadily. No engines, no voices. Their pursuers had moved on, at least for now. "The way to my ranch isn't easy," Michael told Tempest. "We'll have to cross the main road eventually. That's our biggest risk. But once we're there, I can get those restraints off and treat your wounds properly." The stallion tossed his head, a gesture that almost looked like agreement. They left the cave, following the ravine downstream for another half-mile before Michael led them up a muddy incline and back into the forest. He checked the sun's position, adjusted their path, and set a course for Whispering Pines. Progress was slow. The chain connecting Tempest's legs gave just enough slack to walk, but nothing more. Any faster movement and the risk of tripping or falling was too high. Michael could see the exhaustion setting in. The horse's head hung lower with every step, but he pressed on. Then, familiar sights. A lightning-split oak, a boulder shaped like a bear's head. They were close. "Almost there," Michael said, his voice low and steady. Up ahead, the main road came into view, a narrow stretch of asphalt cutting through the forest. A quiet county road, but even one passing car could spell disaster if the driver was loyal to Blackwood. Michael motioned for Tempest to stop just short of the tree line. They waited, listening, watching. One vehicle, one set of eyes. That's all it would take to end everything. After waiting for a quiet moment, Michael and Tempest crossed the road into familiar land, Cooper land. They were close now, just a mile to the ranch, but the sound of an approaching vehicle sent them deeper into the trees. The sheriff's patrol car passed slowly, his loyalties questionable since taking money from Blackwood. Once clear, Michael led Tempest through the back meadow of Whispering Pines Ranch. He saw the house and a light on. Ellie was home, but movement near the barn stopped him. A flashlight scanned the yard. Someone was there. Michael changed course and led Tempest toward the old hunting cabin near the property's edge. It was isolated, stocked, and safe from patrol routes. Inside, he found bolt cutters and began removing the painful restraints from Tempest. The stallion stood still as Michael worked. When the final lock fell, Tempest shook off the memory of captivity and didn't flee. Instead, he gently nudged Michael, who urged him to leave for his own safety. But Tempest stayed, quietly following a few steps behind as they headed toward the house. As they neared the farmhouse, Michael spotted a sheriff's SUV next to Ellie's bike. He told Tempest to stay hidden, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the porch. The door flew open. Ellie ran into his arms. She was relieved, then angry. Sheriff Miller appeared, saying Ellie had called the station when Michael didn't return. He noticed Michael's injuries and the lie about being caught in a storm barely held. A sound in the woods drew Ellie's attention. She ran toward it before Michael could stop her, and Tempest stepped into the light. His wounds were clear and brutal. Ellie was horrified. Miller reached for his holster, but Michael stepped in front, insisting the horse wasn't dangerous. Ellie comforted the stallion, who allowed her to touch him. Michael explained the abuse, and Miller, though cautious, didn't arrest him. He warned Michael that, technically, Tempest was a wild animal in Michael's care without authorization. Later in the barn, Ellie and Michael tended to Tempest's wounds. The injuries were worse than they thought. Ellie suggested calling Dr. Reynolds, who Michael trusted, but Blackwood's influence made help risky. That night, after cleaning the wounds, Ellie refused to leave Tempest alone in the barn. Michael allowed her to stay for a little while. Michael stepped outside to call Frank, an old Army friend who ran a PTSD program for veterans using horses. Frank promised to come in 2 days with help to document the abuse and possibly alert the media. When Michael returned, Ellie was asleep near the stall, and Tempest stood guard over her. Michael gently picked her up, the stallion watching protectively. Inside, Michael put Ellie to bed, pulling Rebecca's old quilt over her. He thought about how Tempest, even after all he'd endured, had begun to help Ellie heal. As he fell asleep himself, it wasn't his wounds that weighed on him. It was the bond forming between his daughter and a Mustang that had suffered just like them.